Some stories survive because they are true. Others survive because people refuse to stop believing them. History remembers emperors. It remembers wars. It remembers kingdoms that rose and fell. But sometimes history remembers something much smaller, a single sword, not because it changed the world, but because the world believed it could. Across Japan, thousands of ancient swords still exist. Many are preserved inside museums. Others remain in temples. Some have been passed from one generation to the next. They are admired as masterpieces of craftsmanship, symbols of honor, loyalty, and the spirit of the samurai. Yet, among these blades, one name has inspired fear. For centuries, Muramasa. According to legend, swords forged by Muramasa carried a terrible curse. They brought bloodshed, betrayal, madness, death. Some believed they demanded blood once they were drawn. Others claimed their owners could never escape tragedy. Even today, collectors, historians, and sword enthusiasts continue to debate the legend. Was there really a cursed sword, or was this simply one of history's greatest myths? To answer that question, we cannot begin with Muramasa. We must begin centuries earlier, before the legend, before the fear, before anyone had ever heard the name Muramasa. We must begin with a question that is even more important. Why did the Japanese believe that a sword could possess something beyond steel? Because unless we understand what a sword truly meant to the people of Japan, the legend of the cursed katana will never make sense. To most civilizations, a sword was a weapon, a tool for war, a means of survival. But in Japan, the sword became something else. Long before the age of the samurai, Japanese craftsmen searched for perfection. Iron sand gathered from rivers, smelted inside the great clay furnace known as the tatara. Days of relentless fire, endless labor, until a rare steel emerged. Tamahagane, the steel that would become the heart of Japanese swords. Yet, steel alone was never enough. A master swordsmith was expected to possess patience, discipline, precision. Every hammer strike mattered, every fold refined the blade, every mistake remained forever. Some traditions even describe swordsmiths purifying themselves before beginning their work through prayer, through ritual, through discipline. Whether every workshop followed these customs remains uncertain, but one thing is beyond doubt. Sword making was treated with extraordinary respect because the blade was never seen as ordinary. It represented skill, honor, responsibility, and eventually the soul of the samurai. By the late Heian period, warriors had become an essential force throughout Japan. They protected powerful families, defended private estates, fought in civil wars, and eventually rose to rule the country. To these warriors, a sword was never just another weapon. It represented duty, loyalty, honor, responsibility. A samurai might lose his wealth, his land, even his life, but to lose his honor was considered a fate worse than death. Over time, the sword became the visible symbol of that honor. To carry it was a privilege. To misuse it was disgrace. To surrender it often meant surrendering one's identity. This idea grew stronger over generations. The idea grew that the sword represented the soul of the samurai. Whether every warrior truly believed those exact words is impossible to know, but the meaning is unmistakable. A sword was expected to reflect the character of the man who carried it. A noble warrior should carry a noble blade. A disciplined warrior should wield it with discipline. The weapon and its owner became inseparable, and perhaps that belief planted the first seed of every legend that followed, because once people began believing that a sword reflected the soul of its owner, it became much easier to believe that a sword could shape its owner's destiny. That idea would survive for centuries, and eventually it would become attached to one name, Muramasa. Surprisingly, very little is known with certainty about Muramasa himself. Historians believe he lived during the Muromachi period, most likely in the 15th or early 16th century. He worked in East Province in what is now Mie Prefecture. Muramasa was not a king, not a general, not a famous samurai. He was a swordsmith, one among many, yet his work stood apart. His blades were renowned for their sharpness, their cutting ability, their exceptional craftsmanship. Warriors sought them, collected them, trusted them. They were weapons built for real battle. Nothing in the historical record suggests Muramasa claimed supernatural powers. Nothing indicates he forged cursed swords. In fact, contemporary evidence simply describes a highly skilled craftsman. So how did an admired swordsmith become the creator of Japan's most infamous blades? The answer does not begin inside a forge. It begins with power, a family that would reshape Japan, the Tokugawa. By the middle of the 16th century, Japan was a nation at war. For more than 100 years, powerful clans fought relentlessly for control. Castles rose across the landscape. Alliances were forged and broken. Brothers fought brothers, fathers buried sons. Victory often lasted only until the next battle. This turbulent age became known as the Sengoku period, the age of warring states. In such a world, a sword was no ornament. It was the difference between life and death. Muramasa blades earned an extraordinary reputation. They were extraordinarily sharp, remarkably durable, and trusted by warriors across Japan, not because they were mysterious, but because they performed when lives depended on them. Among those warriors was a rising family from Mikawa province, the Tokugawa. Few could have imagined that this family would one day unify and rule Japan, or that its destiny would become forever linked with the name Muramasa. According to historical records, several tragedies within the Tokugawa family became associated with Muramasa blades. Tokugawa Ieyasu's grandfather, Matsudaira Kiyoyasu, was killed after being attacked by one of his own retainers. Later tradition claimed the weapon was a Muramasa. Years later, Ieyasu's father, Matsudaira Hirotada, was reportedly wounded by a Muramasa blade during an accident. Then came an even darker chapter. In 1579, Tokugawa Ieyasu ordered his own son, Matsudaira Nobuyasu, to commit seppuku. The decision was driven by political suspicion and pressure from Oda Nobunaga. Historical sources disagree on many details, but later traditions claimed the blade used was another Muramasa. One tragedy may be coincidence, two may raise questions, but when the same name appears again and again, people begin searching for meaning. Human beings have always looked for patterns, especially after tragedy, and sometimes the explanation that survives is not the one supported by evidence. A whisper became a rumor became a legend, and the legend became a curse. In 1603, Tokugawa Ieyasu became shogun. His victory marked the beginning of more than 2.5 centuries of Tokugawa rule. Peace gradually returned to Japan, yet one shadow remained: Muramasa. According to later accounts, Ieyasu developed a deep distrust of Muramasa swords. Whether every story is historically accurate remains a matter of debate, but many historians agree that Muramasa blades became politically sensitive during the Tokugawa era. Some were hidden, some were altered. In certain cases, the signature bearing the name Muramasa was carefully removed from the tang of the blade. Others were simply kept out of sight, not because the steel had changed, but because its name had. A sword, once celebrated for exceptional craftsmanship, had slowly become a political liability. The legend was no longer growing through facts, it was growing through fear. Time has a remarkable way of changing the past. Facts slowly fade, details become uncertain, but stories continue to grow. Long after the battles had ended, the name Muramasa refused to disappear. Instead, it spread far beyond history into novels, kabuki plays, folk tales, modern films, television dramas, anime, video games. With every generation, the legend grew even larger. A master swordsmith slowly transformed into a mythical figure. His blades were no longer admired only for their craftsmanship. They became symbols of danger, of blood, of fate. But legends often reveal far more about people than they do about history. Imagine that you lived 400 years ago. Someone places a sword into your hands, then quietly whispers that every man who carried it met a terrible end. Would you dismiss those words, or would they remain somewhere in your mind? Every battle, every accident, every unexpected death would suddenly seem connected, not because the sword had changed, but because your mind had. Historians call this pattern seeking. Human beings naturally search for meaning. We remember the strange coincidences. We forget the ordinary ones. When enough unusual events gather around a single object, the object begins to change, not physically, but symbolically. A sword becomes more than steel. A name becomes more than a name. And eventually, belief becomes stronger than evidence. So, was the katana really cursed? If we ask history, the answer is surprisingly clear. There is no historical evidence that Muramasa ever forged supernatural swords. No document from his own lifetime describes a curse. No reliable record suggests his blades possessed mysterious powers. Muramasa was, by every historical measure, an extraordinary swordsmith, nothing more. And yet, the story refuses to die, because history alone is not always enough to explain what people choose to believe. A sword cannot hate. It cannot choose its victims. It cannot decide who lives or who dies. Steel has no anger, no revenge, no ambition. It waits silently until someone lifts it. Throughout history, countless people have blamed objects for tragedies, born from human choices, a crown, a throne, a jewel, and sometimes a sword. Perhaps the greatest power of the Muramasa blades was never their sharpness, nor any curse hidden within the steel. Perhaps their true power was something far more dangerous, the ability to make generations of people believe that destiny could be held in their own hands. Some stories survive because they are true. Others survive because people refuse to stop believing them. The legend of Muramasa may never completely disappear, not because historians failed to explain it, but because every generation chooses to tell it once again. And perhaps that is the only curse that ever existed, not inside the katana, but inside the human heart. Thank you for watching. This is Samurai Legacy.